It's my pleasure to introduce Bishop Bard to you. He has been our bishop. This is your fourth year.
Yeah, I'm starting my fourth year.
Starting his fourth year. I am so delighted that he is able to come and share the message this morning. Bishop Bard is, see, look at his face. It just makes me smile every time I see him. I see his picture and I smile. That he just radiates passion and love for Christ. And I know that you'll experience that with him as well.
Thank you, Jeannie. Thank you. Well, thank you so much. I really do appreciate your invitation. And I was glad that I could say yes. It's just a joy to be here with you. In addition to just appreciating being here, I appreciate your ministry for Jesus Christ. I appreciate all the ways that you reach out into your community, including things like a trunk or treat. So I've been a bishop now I'm starting my fourth year. This is the first time I've ever given out a haunted house trophy. So there's new things with this job every day. And I appreciate the way that you share in the wider ministry of the United Methodist Church with your sisters and brothers in Christ throughout the United Methodist Church in Michigan and throughout the world. I do deeply appreciate that, and I couldn't help but notice one of the bulletin boards as I was coming into the church about all of the different missions you have supported already this year, and that really touches my heart, so thank you for that. Please join me in prayer. Gracious God, there are some words on paper up here, and certainly there are a lot of words running around in my head and in my heart. But the word that we most need to hear this morning, oh God, is the word that your Spirit seeks to speak to each of us. So my prayer is that you would use the fragile vessel of these words to speak your Spirit's word to our hearts and minds. Amen. So it is really good to be here. It was good to hear all of the children and good to be up here with them. Such warm feelings. It's a beautiful day in the neighborhood, a beautiful day for a neighbor. Would you be mine? Could you be mine? It's a neighborly day in this beauty wood, a neighborly day for a beauty. Would you be mine? Could you be mine? I have always wanted to have a neighbor just like you. I've always wanted to live in a neighborhood with you. So let's make the most of this beautiful day. Well, it's not that beautiful, but since we're together, why don't we say, would you be mine? Could you be mine? Won't you be my neighbor? Won't you please? Won't you please? Please won't you be my neighbor? So I was really too old. You wouldn't know it from the song. I was really too old to watch Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood when it first arrived on television in 1968. I was already 9. But I soon became old enough to poke fun at it. I mean, this guy with his sweater and his tennis shoes and his puppets and his trolley and that whole neighborhood of make-believe thing, it was really corny and not very cool. But then a few years down the road, I became a parent. And as a parent, I really grew to appreciate Mr. Rogers and his neighborhood and the lessons he was teaching my children about being kind and about working with your feelings. I mean, who really doesn't love Mr. Rogers? And he's kind of made a comeback in recent years, 16 years after his death. Last year, there was a well-received and reviewed documentary, Won't You Be My Neighbor? And this year at Thanksgiving, by the way, this is not a promotion. I'm not being paid by the film company, but this year at Thanksgiving, Tom Hanks is starring in a biopic of Fred Rogers called A Beautiful Day in the Neighborhood. You know you have become a cultural icon when Tom Hanks is playing you in a movie. Who doesn't love Fred Rogers? Well, to be honest, after the program had been on for a number of years, there were some social commentators who argued that his message had given birth to a narcissistic society, that his program had destroyed a generation by telling everyone they were special without them having to do anything to earn being special. How are we preparing, these critics said something like, how are we preparing children for the real world, that world of competition, by feeding them that kind of drivel? And we love our competition, maybe even more than we love Mr. Rogers. And if Mr. Rogers gets in the way of being more competitive, well, so long to that neighborhood. Of course, I'm exaggerating, maybe just a little, but we love our competition. Think of the time and attention we spend on competition, on athletics, on sports. I know I enjoy them. I've watched a fair amount of the baseball playoffs and now the World Series between the Houston Astros and the Washington Nationals. As I was finishing up the sermon preparation, the Nationals were ahead 2-0. The Astros have now won the last 2 games, so the World Series is tied 2 games apiece. To be honest, I'm old enough to remember when the Houston Astros were in the National League and the Washington baseball team was an American League team, but I digress. And on Thursday night, I checked to see how the Minnesota Vikings had done in football. As you heard me say, I'm from Minnesota. They beat the Washington Redskins 19-9. Sorry about that Vikings-Lions game last week. I took my sermon title from a television show based on our fascination with competition, The Amazing Race. It's a reality competition show about teams racing across the globe. And apparently it's an award-winning program, though I have to confess I've never seen it. I just know enough of it to steal the title for my sermon title. And it's not simply that we enjoy athletic competition, but competition and sports metaphors have come to define other areas of our life together. Our politics is full of athletic images. Quarterly fundraising becomes a competition. Candidates who come from behind are referred to as dark horse candidates, a reference to horse racing. We've come to believe in our society that market competition is a magic elixir that can solve almost any problem we throw at it. We forget that sometimes markets fail, or maybe there are certain kinds of goods that aren't necessarily best allocated on the basis of markets. You know, if I were to fall here and break my arm, I'm probably not going to be making 5 or 6 calls to figure out which hospital I might want to go to, which offered me the most competitive rates. So I'm not going to make this an extension of the democratic healthcare debate, okay? I'm just going to stop about right here. And even spirituality can become a competition. There's a story from the Jewish tradition. The chief rabbi of a synagogue is kneeling in prayer and crying, tears running down his cheeks. He's praying, hollering out to God, "Lord, I am nothing, I am nothing, I am absolutely nothing." And next to him is the chief donor to that synagogue, a wealthy banker. And he kneels down and prays loudly, "I'm nothing. God, forgive me for thinking I'm something. I am nothing." And pretty soon they're joined by Shlomo, the poor man who sweeps the synagogue out after the services and hauls the trash. And Shlomo gets down on his knees and says, "I am nothing. I am nothing." And the rabbi quickly elbows the banker and says, "Hey, look who thinks he's nothing." Competition. And even Paul uses athletic metaphors in writing about the Christian life in 2 Timothy. "I fought the good fight. I finished the race. I have kept the faith." While it is a sports metaphor, an athletic metaphor, there is something different about it. The focus really, if you think about it, is not on competition, but on endurance and on engagement. Paul isn't saying, "I finished and I finished first," but he finishes. So, in a moment of great foolishness, earlier this month, my wife and I both signed up to participate in a half marathon next summer. If you want to, do some fundraising and decide if I'm going to finish or not, you might raise some money that way. And I'll be honest with you, I am not competing. My goal is to finish. Notice the story Jesus tells in Luke 18. Two men go to the temple to pray, a Pharisee and a tax collector. The story is already a bit of a setup. Pharisees were deep spiritual seekers in Jesus' day, admired by many, not all, but by many. But tax collectors were universally despised. There are some things that don't change much over time. But in Jesus' time, tax collectors were also collaborators with the Roman occupation government. And they made their money by not only collecting taxes to pass on to Rome, they'd add a personal surcharge. And that's how they gained their wealth. So the Pharisee prays first, God, I thank you that I'm not like other people, thieves, rogues, adulterers, even like this tax collector. And just in case God might be forgetting something about him, his prayer continues, I fast twice a week. I give 1/10 of my income. So at this point in the story, you might not really like the Pharisee. Not an admirable character, but at least he's not a tax collector. He may be a bit of a braggart, but at least he's not the tax collector. The tax collector prays a very different prayer. God, be merciful to me, a sinner. So by the end of the story, not only is the Pharisee an unlikable character, but suddenly Jesus has told a story and the tax collector's the hero. It's the competitive one who got it wrong. Now, please hear me. I'm not trying to say competition is wrong. When I play games, I still like to win. I try to be a gracious loser. And I'm not competing in a half marathon. I'm trying to make it through that, and I enjoy sports. I'm not saying any of that's wrong. But what I'm trying to say or help us understand is that competition and metaphors of competition are inadequate as a frame for understanding what's most important in life. Life in relationship to the God we know in Jesus Christ, life as a follower of Jesus. What I'm trying to say is that the most amazing race, which is life, really isn't a race. At the heart of life, it's not about competition. It's about engagement. It's about relationship. It's about growth. And if that's the case, then maybe part of what we can do sometimes is look at how in our wider world we overuse competitive metaphors, maybe even in our politics. Just a thought, no more about politics this morning. Like, I shouldn't promise that because sometimes stuff just comes out, but not planned. So let me focus in here. The most amazing race, life itself, isn't really a race. It's about engagement. It's about relationship. It's about growth. So where would I get funny ideas like that, except from this story Jesus tells about two people praying in the temple? Well, maybe from the 5th chapter of Galatians, where Paul says the fruit of the Spirit, what happens when God's Spirit's at work in our lives, it's not that we win. The fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, generosity, faithfulness, gentleness, self-control. Those are words about engagement. They're words about relationship. They're qualities in which we can continue to grow. And frankly, our lives are about letting those qualities take root in us and grow in us and flourish within us. And then there's John Wesley. John Wesley is that person to whom we Methodists, United Methodists, trace one of the people to whom we trace the beginning of our stream of the Christian tradition. John Wesley wrote a lot about something he called Christian perfection. It's kind of an unfortunate term in some ways, but it was his way of talking about, so what is the goal of life? What do we want life to be like as followers of Jesus? He used the word Christian perfection. And again, the unfortunate side of that is it can lead to praying prayers like the Pharisee. Look how good I'm doing, God. I do this, I do that. But that's not his intent. So Wesley wrote a longer essay about Christian perfection, and then a while later, he wanted to summarize what was in that 25 pages. And he said this, by perfection I mean the humble gentle, patient love of God and our neighbor, ruling our habits, attitudes, words, and actions. The humble, gentle, patient love of God and our neighbor, ruling our habits, attitudes, words, and actions. It's about engagement. It's about relationship. It's about growth. So if life and relationship to the God we know in Jesus Christ is about engagement and relationship and growth, not so much about competition, I think it suggests there are three kinds of work for us. Now, this is not work to earn God's love or favor. Please hear that. This is not work to earn God's love or favor. In fact, it is work made possible by the unfailing love of God for us, God's grace towards us always. It's because of God's love for us that we're invited to live differently. So three kinds of work. There's inner work or soul work. The other morning I was watching the CBS News morning program. Again, not an endorsement of CBS as a network. I just happened to have it on. And I heard Bruce Springsteen interviewed. If you don't know, Bruce Springsteen has recently released some new music, Western Stars, and has even made a film related to the music that's coming to theaters. And in the interview, Bruce Springsteen was talking about struggle in life. And mostly what he was talking about was internal struggle. Bruce Springsteen, if you don't have any idea who he is a rock and roll musician, has done quite well. Financial issues are not a struggle for Bruce Springsteen. But he's talking about struggle. And he said, the struggle never stops. That's life. And he went on to talk about the broken pieces in his own life and said, music is a repair shop. I'm trying to repair myself. If I can do that well enough, I will help repair you. That's soul work. It's about growth. It's about relationship. It's about engagement. And we do this soul work by the grace of God. We do it because of God's love. The writer Anne Lamott, in her book Almost Everything, wrote this: the bigger, more real, and friendlier the world inside me becomes, the safer I feel in the outside world. Inner work, growth, soul work, our life. And I can't help but think about another Fred Rogers song. I can't remember the tune, so I'm not going to punish you again with singing. But he had a song about dealing with feelings. What do you do with the mad you feel when you feel so mad you could bite? When the whole world seems oh so wrong and nothing you do seems very right. And then further on in the song, he says, I can stop when I want to, stop when I wish, stop anytime. What a great lesson. We all feel mad sometimes. We can deal with it. We can control it. Inner work, soul work. Then there's mind work. And I think of the hymn, Take My Life and Let It Be. And in one of the verses we sing, take my intellect and use every power as thou shalt choose. Our minds are great gifts from God to be cultivated and used, and that's not always easy. A philosopher named Martha Nussbaum has written, thinking is hard, fear and blame are easy. And if you want any confirmation of that, turn on the news for an hour any night. Thinking is hard, fear and blame are easy. Yet how much we need to cultivate our minds in this complex world if we are to grow, if we are to engage the world so that we make a difference in it. The novelist F. Scott Fitzgerald, who frankly in his own life left a lot of soul work undone, once wrote this: the test of a first-rate intelligence is the ability to hold two opposed ideas in the mind at the same time and still retain the ability to function. I like that. Hold two ideas in your mind at the same time and still function. We need that kind of mind work. And soul work and mind work are related. It's difficult to cultivate our minds deeply if we are deeply anxious and fearful. A church consultant, a minister, author by the name of Peter Steinke, writes that it's only when we're able to keep our anxiety in check that we can truly think and look for alternatives It says, when we keep our anxiety in check, then our thoughts are more precise, accurate, and clear. People who study the brain find that when people are really anxious, certain parts of their brain get in the way of clear thinking. Soul work and mind work are related. Third kind of work, world work, and of two kinds, relational and communal. The life of faith, which is about growth and love and grace, which is about relationships, which is about engagement, is more than soul work and mind work and inner work. It's also about engaging the world and others. After all, it was Jesus who said that people would know his disciples because of love, the love they had for each other. One might even say that we do that inner work and that soul work and that mind work so that we can love others better, so that we can live more lovingly in relationships with each other. One could say that we do that inner work, that soul work, that mind work, so that we can also better engage the world to make a difference in it. A psychoanalyst named Michael Eigen, in a book called Faith, wrote this: you can't just work on institutional injustices without the actual people involved working on themselves. And you can't just work on yourself without also working on the injustices in society. Inner work, soul work, mind work, world work, that's what life with Jesus is all about. The most amazing race isn't a race. It's not about competition. It's about growth. It's about engagement. It's about relationship. However, I do recognize that using the term work might pull us back toward competition. So let me just offer another word. The most amazing race, life itself, isn't really a race, it's a journey. Yes, there's difficult work to do, but there's also moments on that journey simply to be savored, even when stretches of the journey are difficult. The most amazing race, life itself, isn't really a race. It's about knowing that we are loved wildly by God and Jesus Christ just because we are, not because we are better. The most amazing race, life itself, it's about growing in love and continuing to grow in love. It's about tending and nurturing and cultivating love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, generosity, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. It's about doing the difficult and necessary soul work. It's about developing our minds. It's about deepening our relationships. It's about engaging the world to make a difference. Now, some of you may be disappointed now that I'm arriving at the end. You're not disappointed about that, I know. Some of you may be disappointed that I've not spent time this morning talking about the difficult situation facing the United Methodist Church. But I want to suggest that I have. You see, if we are unable to connect again with the kind of life work made possible by God's grace and love in Jesus Christ, this work of growth and relationship and engagement, soul work, mind work, world work, then to be honest, if we can't connect with that, it does not matter what institutional form the church takes, because we will have lost what makes the church the church. And if we engage more deeply in that kind of work, the institutional issues will sort themselves out. And we will remain committed to being God's people in Jesus Christ. People who know that the most amazing race really isn't a race. It's a journey. It's not about winning. It's about loving. Amen.